All right, guys, let's continue our study this morning. If you want to open up your Bibles to John chapter 5. I'm a little bit off. Last week, we were looking through our deal there, and I told you that they repeated the lesson twice in my study book here, in both my quarterlies. And so, not only did they do that, but then they left out this one. So a big chunk of it. So actually, I spent 3 days this week looking at the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, thinking that was our lesson for this week. It's not. And so we're on there. I'm on the right lesson now. We're in John chapter 5, even though I spent most of my week looking at John chapter 6. But that's okay. What it's meant to be. You should look at the pages on the number and not just... I just turned the page and just assumed, okay, well, they just left out a section. No, they really messed it up. But that's okay. We're all good. So John chapter 5, we're going to continue this series as we look through these 7 signs of John, 7 signs in John that all point to Jesus as the Son of God. And so we're going to continue on with that today in John chapter 5, and we're going to look at the third sign that John gives us, and it's interesting to me that in each one of these situations that John actually calls them signs. He doesn't call them, because a lot of times we look at these things and what do we think? We don't think of them in terms of signs. What do we think of them in terms of? What do we call them? We just call them miracles, right? These are miracles, right? That Jesus performs and that Jesus is doing as he's going along. But the point is, we see signs every day, right? And what is the purpose of the sign? And I don't mean like these kind of miracles, but just like as you're driving down the road, you see a sign. What's the purpose of the sign?
Advertising.
Okay, it could be advertising, right?
Guiding you where we're headed. Guiding you where you're going.
Okay, could be guiding you to where you're going. Could be advertising. It could be,
Warnings and cautions.
Yeah, warnings and cautions. I like the idea, especially though that the advertising, because you come across a sign that says a Cracker Barrel up ahead, right? Well, immediately, what are you starting to think about?
Food.
Well, you don't stop and chew on the sign, right? It's pointing you to something beyond that. It's letting you know that it's up ahead. Same way with the directions. Same way with a turn, you know what I mean, that's coming up. Some of those are right there, but more often than not, especially in some of the states in the East, don't get me started on how they do their signs on the East Coast. But anyway, around here, believe it or not, we have good signs in Missouri. But anyway, it lets you know that something is approaching, something's up ahead. You might even want to be in this lane, as you're coming up because your exit is getting close. And don't speed past me and then slam on your brakes in your little four-wheeler just to get ahead of me. I just really don't want to touch my own brakes whenever that happens when I'm driving a truck. But anyway, don't get me started. But they're signs. But the point is, they're pointing to something that's beyond that. You're not supposed to just see the Cracker Barrel sign. You're supposed to want to get to the Cracker Barrel. It's not there. It's beyond that. And that's what John is wanting us to do also in all of these things. And that's kind of why he structures his gospel around these 7 signs. He's not wanting us to see the miracle. He's wanting to see us the message and the purpose behind the miracle. And so, as we've looked at the last couple of weeks, the miracles that have happened in a couple different realms almost. So the first miracle we looked at was the turning of the water into the wine. And that was mainly around a Jewish audience and a Jewish community. And so we had the first sign there for this Jewish audience, Jewish community, especially about his glory. And then last week, it was more of a Gentile audience because it was a Roman official's son who was healed. And so we had a second sign in that, and that pointed to his mercy, that he came, and his grace, that it was for more people. It was not just for the Jews, but it was for everybody. And then today we're going to move into this third one, and it's going to be a picture of his authority. And And it's and all of these are very familiar passages. They're stories we know very well, but they're always good for us to go back and look at and think about again. But so today we're gonna, as we're doing this, we're gonna see a picture of a man that made an assumption. And we make assumptions every day, right? We make assumptions all the time. And even sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. But what are just some of the simple assumptions that we make every day? Let's go back to traffic real quick.
He's gonna let me pass.
You assume that person in the left lane is turning left, right? Or that person in that left turn lane, you hope they're turning left. You assume that's going to happen, right? Kenny, you assume that people are going to stop, right?
Sometimes that gets you into a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, and all these things. What are some other kind of assumptions that we make every day?
The car works.
Huh?
The car works.
Okay, you just assume that car's going to start up, right? Yeah, you just assume that, used to you had to turn the key, now you push a button. But whatever you got to do, depending on how old your car is, right? Mine, you still have to turn the key, and mine, you have to hold the steering wheel just right to make the key turn. Got that kind of age on that old 97 Ford now. But certain things. What else do we assume?
We're going to wake up the next morning.
Okay, sometimes we just make those kind of assumptions, right? We just assume that, hey, we got time. We assume that we have more time, that we have more time to do things, more time to get things done. If you go to the restaurant to get something to eat after lunch today, you assume they're going to cook that food properly, right? If any of you have ever missed out on that assumption, that's not fun, right?
Steve, you was talking about the driving, and for people who've spent much time on the road, especially on the highways, and you see these guys, or ladies, I don't want to assume it's all men, but anyway, weaving in and out of traffic, going about 20, 25 miles, and I think to myself, they really assume everybody out here is a good driver, and no one's going to make just a little bit of a mistake, because I've had guys cut in front of me, people cut in front of me. It scares me because I think if I'd have just done one little bit at that speed, we're both going to meet Jesus.
Yeah, it's true. But we make assumptions. We make assumptions all the time, and unfortunately, we also, I think, sometimes make assumptions about how God works. And usually, those assumptions, even whenever we make assumptions about how God works, are based on what we want or what we expect. Same thing in all these situations that we just talked about, whether it's at the restaurant or in traffic or just about life in general. Most of these assumptions that we make are based upon our own expectations, right? What we want to see happen or what we want to have done. And one of the things that hopefully we see in this lesson today is that that's not how God works, right? How does God usually work? If God intervenes, how does he usually intervene?
As to what he sees best for us.
Okay?
Not what we necessarily see best for ourselves.
Okay?
And actually, to take that a step further, God intervenes, everything he does is to bring glory to himself.
Right?
And
Yeah.
we automatically assume when something bad happens to us, we take it personal.
Mm-hmm.
We don't look at the bigger picture because, I always go back, you look at John the Baptist, very faithful.
Mm-hmm.
Where did he end up and how did he end up?
Right.
I'm sure at the time people thought, well, he was just a crazy man.
Yeah.
And he got what he deserved.
Right. Yeah. So we got to be careful, about those types of things. And the thing that we're going to see, I think, in this lesson today is that a lot of times what God does is actually beyond our expectations. He works in ways that are beyond what we would expect. And that's what we're going to see today. So let's look at this sign of Jesus' authority. Somebody read for me John chapter 5, verses 1 through 7.
After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda.
However you want to say it's how we're going to go with this.
Bethsaida. Thank you. In Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me."
Okay. So, we have our settings switched. You know, we were in Galilee, and John, for whatever reason, portion of Jesus' Galilee ministry is very, very short, very, very brief. So now we're back down, and we're back in Jerusalem, and back in the Judean part of Jesus' ministry again here in John chapter 5, as he sets up this next story, this next sign, and Jesus is there. He's going. He's in and around Bethesda in Jerusalem, in this area where this pool was, the pool of Bethesda, there's all these people that are gathered there, and they're gathered there for healing. Bethesda literally means house of mercy, and so it kind of becomes this area where people come looking for help, looking for aid, and people are also kind of being drawn to this area because they believe that there is some ability to be healed in this pool, right? But some of your Bibles don't have verse 4, right? And some of your Bibles have a verse 4. Some of your Bibles have a verse 4, but it's bracketed. Okay? Even in your quarterly, or no, not in your quarterly. In your quarterly, verse 4 does not exist. What he just read, verse 4 is not there. But in my older, more expensive, if you want to get a good Bible, you can get these extra things. Verse 4 says, "He was waiting for the moving of the waters, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. And whoever then went first after the stirring of the water and stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted." Okay? So, why is verse 4 not in our quarterly? Why is verse 4 not in some of your Bibles? Well, the reason for that is a discovery back in the 1980s where we found some older texts and we found some older manuscripts that don't have verse 4. And so, because of that, and even in my study Bible, it's in there, but it's bracketed, and it tells you this is not in the older manuscripts. Okay? And so, likely what we're dealing with here is we're just dealing with the fact that somewhere along the line, some translator, some scribe that was rewriting this probably has added this in there as a note to kind of help explain the situation. Okay? And not to mean that it isn't true or that it didn't happen, but I think part of the thing is here is that that's not what, well, it,
Seems like it's more of an opinion than a fact.
yes, and the truth of the matter is, and even what Jesus is going to say here, no angel's going down here and stirring this water. Okay? When you go to this area and you see these two pools are still there today. Some of you have been there, some of you have seen it. My wife has actually been there, and my wife has actually seen it. It's actually two different pools. It's an upper pool and a lower pool, and it's interesting that it talks about this area, and it talks about there being 5 colonnades. You can go there today, and you can still see these 5 colonnades. These pools were built during the time of Herod the Great, after the return of the people from Babylonian exile. And it was a place for they were public reservoirs, if you will. And normally you would think about colonnades, you'd think of for a pool, and you'd think there'd be 4, right? north, south, east, west. There would be 4, but there's 5. The reason for this is because they're not positioned the way you think they would be. There's actually 2 pools. There's an upper pool, 5 colonnades, and there's a lower pool. The water flows into the upper pool first, and there is an underground pipe, an aqueduct that connects the upper pool and the lower pool. Guess what happens when the upper pool gets full? It pushes water into the lower pool, and the water comes through the lower pool, through the pipe, and what happens? The water gurgles in the lower pool. And so this was a superstition or a belief, if you will, that something miraculous was happening in this lower pool, and then people would go in and be healed. So this is kind of really what is going on here in this situation. And I probably spent way too much time talking about that part of this story already. But it's important to note that this is what the belief of the man was. And I think that at least that part is okay, and that part for us is good. But to know. But Jesus comes to him. So let's a couple things I just want to point out real quick. This guy's been there a long time. Right? 38 years. You know, that for some of us that's a long time. For most of us that's a long time. Okay? And it's interesting to me. The other thing that I like is the fact that the man doesn't cry out, the man doesn't call out, the man doesn't do anything to get Jesus' attention. But I simply love verse 6 where it says, and Jesus saw him. Don't you? I kind of love that. That Jesus, how many times do you think this man had people walk by and not notice him? Or choose not to notice him, right? But Jesus sees him. And he sees him there in his infirmity. He sees him there in his need. And he sees him lying there. And I just love the fact that Jesus has this habit of ministering to the weak, ministering to the wounded, ministering to the sick, and the unnoticed, the people that other people just walked on by. And I just think there's a little lesson in that for all of us. You know, we can't we can't do for people what Jesus can do for people. But just be on the lookout for those people that are on the edges of society, those people that are on the fringes, and just see them. See them. Take a moment and see them. Oftentimes, we don't want to be bothered. You know what I mean? And just see them. The next thing that I kind of want to talk about real quick is the question that Jesus asked. Why does Jesus ask this man the question, do you want to get well? It seems like an obvious answer, right?
If he was there 38 years, it kind of makes you wonder. I mean, why hadn't somebody helped him before? Or
Yeah.
a lot of questions there about, you know, do you have nobody to help you? Or surely others have come and got healed.
So there's been some kind of things that have happened here for
and
people,
you,
right?
And you weren't part of it. Why not?
Yeah. And I think also, and it's the only time Jesus ever asked somebody this question. And all of the things that he did, it's the only time he ever asked, do you want to be well? Or do you want to be healed? Do you want to be made whole? And the man immediately says, well, I've had nobody to help me, right? Anytime it's stirred up, somebody always gets there before me, right? But what the man kind of misses And so what do you think John, what do you think the man's expectation was of Jesus at that moment?
That he would hang around maybe and help him get into the pool.
Yeah, that he would just help him, that he would just like physically help him get into the pool. Hey, do you want to get well? Hey, you got time to stick around and wait till the water goes in? Right? I could use some help. But Jesus is going to go way beyond his expectations. He doesn't realize that Jesus is offering to put his compassion into action here in just a moment. And I think also, do you think there's anything else going on there with that question?
I would think after having been there for 38 years, he was just happy to not happy, but just satisfied with just being there, I guess. I mean, and I think Jesus' question was, do you even want to get well?
Right?
Or are you just happy with?
Are you satisfied with where you're at? Right? Sometimes some of our sicknesses and illnesses and conditions go on a long time, right?
There's a lot of
Maybe
blame.
Jesus was actually asking two questions at the same time.
Okay?
Because obviously, the most obvious answer is, do you want to physically be healed?
Right.
The word of the next meeting, I know I'm getting ahead of you.
Yeah.
But the other question, ultimately, what Jesus is concerned about, do you want to be spiritually healed?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of lame people around, and that can be any of us at any point in time.
Yeah. Sometimes, though, I think we just get comfortable in it. You know what I mean? And you know, have you ever prayed for something for so long? You dealt with something for so long you almost give up hope? Well, this is just the way it is, right? It's just the way things are. And Jesus says it doesn't have to be. Do you want to be well? Do you want me to get involved? And so I think there is something to that. Let's go ahead and jump into verses 8 through 11. Somebody read those for me.
Get up, Jesus told him, pick up your mat and walk. Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat." He replied, "The man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk."
All right. So Jesus is going to go way beyond what he expects, right? He's like, well, if you want to stick around, can you help me get into the water? And Jesus I love the fact that Jesus just completely ignores his statement about having no help to get into the pool, right? He doesn't even, he's like, okay, whatever. He's just like, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Couple things. Both of those, the get up and the pick up your mat and walk, they're all imperative commands in the Greek. But they're different. So the very first one, the get up, is a verb that is a one-time action. Get up once. And then the pick up your mat and walk is a continual action. It is one that's going to need to be. So the first one is get up. Never going to have to be repeated. Just get up. The miracle's going to happen. You're going to be healed. But then you're going to pick up your mat and you're going to walk and you're going to walk and you're going to keep on walking, and it's just going to continue to be an ongoing state of your being from now on. So it's like, this is never coming back. This is never going to afflict you again. This is, you know what I mean, one-time action and then continuous action. You're laying there for 38 years. Somebody tells you, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. What are you doing? Probably laugh.
Hesitate.
What's that?
Hesitate.
Hesitate?
But I think his first question, I think Jesus' first question about, do you want to be healed? I think it reminded him why he was actually there. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you do forget. And so,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I really do want to be healed. The fact that he actually asked him in that manner.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then I think that guy was ready to hear something else, but he didn't really realize it at all. And
Right.
otherwise, I don't think he would have laughed. Said, yeah, right. But
Yeah.
the fact that
I mean, I don't even need to be healed, but after I've sat somewhere at a ball game for like 3 or 4 hours, it takes a little work just to get up off that bleachers. Right? This is 38 years. Can you imagine how stiff, how sore? I mean, I don't know, right? Yeah, I don't do bleachers very good anymore. I gotta take my little seat with the back support on it now, right? If I'm gonna have to sit through very many ball games. But yeah, it's amazing. Even just, I don't know what happened. I don't know what the man felt. I don't know what, in that moment, exactly what transpired. But instantly, the man got well. And that well means it is not just a little better. He was like, good as new. He was like, I feel like, I mean, I don't know how old he was. We know he's more than 38 years old, but, you know, we don't know how long he's been laying there. But this is like, I don't just got new knees and hips, I got little kid knees and hips again. Right? This is brand new. I am completely whole. I am completely well again. And
A new creation.
new creation. Right? Something that's happened. That's the kind of meaning of what's going on, what's taking place here. And he gains all of these abilities not because of getting into some pool, not because of some belief that an angel's going to come down, stir waters, any of those types of things. He's gained these abilities because of the power in Jesus' spoken words. Just like at creation, when Jesus spoke everything into being, Jesus speaks, and it's made new. It's completely whole again. And that's why, and it's one of the things that John wants you to see in this sign, is what he said back in the very beginning of his gospel in chapter 1, verse 4, when when John said of Jesus, and in him was life. Okay? In him was life, that creating ability that only God has. Okay? And so that's kind of what's going on here. Okay? Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and he started to walk. Okay? But we got an issue. What's the issue?
it was the Sabbath.
It's the Sabbath. Sunday. What are you not supposed to do on Sunday? You're not supposed to work on Sunday. Okay? The fourth commandment, the 10 Commandments, is you're to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Okay? Actually, they were prohibited from doing work on the Sabbath. But there's one little issue with that, though, right? The issue is work isn't defined. I mean, we didn't put a definition in the commandment about what work was. Okay? And so, because of that, they decided to create their own definitions of what work was. Okay? And one of those things was you couldn't carry goods. Okay? This was something that they kind of added on in what they called the tradition of the elders to prevent you from unintentionally breaking the fourth commandment or doing any kind of work on a Sabbath day. And so when the man got up and started to walk and started to carry his mat, that was considered carrying goods, and therefore he had just broken the fourth commandment and was working on the Sabbath day. And so the religious leaders, whoever it was, these people confront him and they say, well, they're completely ignoring this sign that's just happened, and they're saying, well, the law prohibits you from picking up your mat. And I kind of love the man's response because it kind of harkens me back to Adam and Eve, right? I mean, not in a weird kind of way. I don't know why I shouldn't do that. But anyway, well, the man that told me got me well told me to do it, so I did it, right? It's kind of passing the buck here. Well, the man who told me well told me pick up your mat and walk, and so he did. Let's go ahead and read. We're going to skip some of that dialogue in between here, and let's go ahead and read verses 17 through 20.
Jesus responded to them, "My Father is still working, and I am working also." This is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his Father, making himself equal to God. Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, the Son is not able to do anything on his own, but what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son likewise does these things. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he is doing, and he will show him even greater works than these, that you will be amazed."
Okay. So, I begin to question about the Sabbath and about breaking the fourth commandment and doing this healing, doing this work on a Sabbath day. And this isn't going to be the only time that Jesus is going to get crossways with them about the Sabbath, right? We've got several different occasions where Jesus is going to do something, or his disciples are going to do something like stripping wheat, you know what I mean, heads of wheat as they're walking along and eating it on a Sabbath. And so they're going to be confronted over, he's going to be confronted over that multiple times going forward. But this is the first time. And this is the one that's kind of set the stage for all the other ones, because they're going to keep trying to keep catching him in the same thing over and over because of what he says right here. Jesus, well, what did he say? It's all right, we'll just skip over it. Jesus responds in verse 17, okay? And his response is why is the fourth commandment there? Why do we have a commandment that says, you shall remember the Sabbath and keep it holy? You shall not do any work on that day. Why do we have that? Why is that one of the 10 Commandments?
The day of rest. God rested on the seventh day, so.
Okay, so it harkens all the way back to creation, the creation story and the creation account, right? In the beginning, when God created everything, he did all the creating in 6 days. And on the seventh day, just as you said, Gray, God said that on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. And so he didn't do any work on that day. And so, in the design of creation, we are designed to be a people that need rest. Okay? You can't burn the candle at both ends all the time. You have to have rest. You have to have reset. And more specifically, you don't just need physical rest, you need spiritual rest. You need a day to reset and to refocus and to get your mind off of everything else going on in the world and to reset and realign your relationship with God, right? That's what it's about. And so you were created with that need. And God knew that, and that's part of why this was all set up. But here's the thing. So, in the beginning, God rested on the seventh day. Does God still keep a Sabbath?
Not like that.
Not like that, does he, Chad? Do we need a Sabbath? Yes. Does God need a Sabbath? No. God doesn't need a Sabbath, and God doesn't take any days off. God works all the time. God works on a Sabbath. And the Jewish people, even in their traditions, believe that God worked on Sabbath. In what ways do they see God working on the Sabbath? All the time, just in daily life. What do they see?
Babies being born.
Babies are being born, so God's at work. On the other end of that spectrum, people are dying on a Sabbath. So God has to be at work. What else?
Sun comes up.
The sun comes up. Rains on a Sabbath. Things grow. Things are happening. All of creation keeps working. All of creation keeps moving. God isn't resting. So even in their tradition, even in their belief, God doesn't need a Sabbath. And so whenever Jesus says in verse 17, my Father is still working, he just established, and that's big. He says, my Father's still working, so I'm still working. My Father doesn't need a Sabbath. I don't need a Sabbath either. He's equating himself as being equal with God. And so he's saying, and what they're hearing is, I'm above your laws. I'm above even the Ten Commandments. I have a greater authority than the law. And I certainly have greater authority than all your oral traditions that you've added to the law. And so that little line of, my Father's still working, really catches them. That's the part that, because isn't it interesting that even in here, he just says, my Father's still working, and I'm still working also. And then immediately John says, and this is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. And he hasn't really even done that yet. But that's what John inserts that, and John tells us that in verse 18 before he gets down to the rest of Jesus' response in verse 19. And that's because, see, sometimes we put the order. And we think, oh, okay, well, they're mad because of everything he's saying in verse 19. But John tells you they're already mad. They're already to the point of wanting to try to kill him, even after he just simply says, my Father's still working. And so that's where this picture of authority comes in. That's where John says this is a sign of Jesus' authority. Jesus goes on, he says, truly, I tell you, the Son is not able to do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father's doing. So what's he just said? What did he just say? God's at work. My Father's at work. I just did what Dad told me to do. You got a problem with me? Take it up to Dad. Right? And so likewise the Son does these things. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he's doing, and he'll show him even greater works than these, so that you will even be amazed. Okay? So just a little interesting note there that I hope you kind of can draw out of this is that God doesn't need a Sabbath. And God was at work all the time. You know, because if God wasn't at work, there wouldn't be any point in us showing up today. Right? Because we're showing up with the expectation that even as we rest, even as we reset, even as we refocus, even as we spend a day in worship, that God's still at work. And God is at work. And Jesus is equating himself with God in this. Okay? And so he has authority over all things. And one of the things that your quarterly talks about, it says the greater truth is to see the power and the purpose of God that was shown ultimately in the healing of our sickness of sin. And so he's wanting us to see that he has authority over all things and not just over the physical element, but there is a spiritual element that is here at work as well. And just like in part of that dialogue that we didn't talk about, Kenny mentioned it, that Jesus, when the guy comes back to Jesus later, he's going to tell him, he's going to go and sin no more. So he's telling him to have a changed life, to have a transformed life. And so there's several things that are at work there. But what are some of just the general lessons that we can learn from this third sign from Jesus? What are some things that kind of stick out to you guys as you've read through this and worked through this week? Any other just thoughts or questions about anything?
You have to want to be made healed.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good one. What else?
Were people really being healed at that pool? What on earth motivated him to stay put for 38 years?
I think there was.
And why couldn't they figure out that the stirring of the water was from the
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I think that there's I think there's probably, boy.
Why do people play the lottery?
Yeah.
I'm reading that and I'm just going, scam alert.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they're probably, this is my opinion, okay? This isn't anything to go off of. I honestly think that something probably happened there at some point in time in the past.
And they just clung to that.
And they just clung to it. You know what I mean? And the other thing is this was also just, remember, this was just kind of a gathering point for a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of needs, right?
Right.
This is where you went. This was the food kitchen, for lack of a better, you know what I mean? This was the place that you went to have needs met. This is where you hoped people would come by and just maybe give you where you beg, you know what I mean? People share things and stuff out, just things like that. So I think there's an element of this was just where you went, and I think something probably did happen there, but yeah, I think the whole angel thing was just, you know how stories go and how things, you know what I mean, happen over time. But
And then he made the comment that he didn't have anybody to help him, so that's why he had never made him in there, which to me says that other people helped other people
Yeah.
into the pool. Did they ever do that on the Sabbath?
well, probably. Well, oh boy, they'd have gotten in trouble if they
Yeah,
did,
probably not.
but probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw this in Ethiopia. The church itself, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, always had a place for healings to occur.
Mhm.
Now, I mean, some people really did say they were healed. Now,
Right.
who knows what going on there, because they're what, box got in. But anyway, people would gather there, they would bring people, they would, it's kind of like I want to say Dropbox kind of idea, where you just would go and take people, but then you could go there and you would take food to them, it would be your son and your daughter, and you'd just feed them that. And they would have a place to be, and then the others, it became a culture.
Yeah.
It became a place, like you said, a place to be, a place to belong.
Yep.
And people didn't look at you in disgust. I mean, it was, oh, well, you're in the right place,
Yeah.
if you have this kind of.
And that's kind of what this place had become.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And I think that even kind of goes back to the question of, do you want to be well? Yeah. I don't know.
Kind of like hanging out in that environment.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Yeah. Well,
Used
you
to.
know, I'm not making any kind of political statement here or anything like that, but it's kind of like welfare in our own country. Do you want a job?
Steve, I think one of it,
Do you want to work, or are you what do a lot of I run into a lot of people in those situations, and what are they going to tell you?
I can make more money.
I can make more money not doing anything than I can by going out and getting that job. You know what I mean? And so it comes to the point where you almost and even when they say that, you know, there's a part of me I'm like, and then there's a part of me I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it. You know what I mean? I kind of get it. You know.
This guy's been there for 38 years, and he's obviously been eating
Yes.
and without working.
Right. And there's a sense that you almost become just a victim of the system. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Not that the system is bad, not that even their system was bad, or what you were describing was bad, but you know what I mean? You can get so comfortable in it, you're just like, I don't know if I want to get out of it. You know, this isn't so bad. But anyway, a few things there. Anything else?
I think it also points out how easily it is for us to put our hopes into materialistic things.
Yeah. Or all those types of things. Yeah. I kind of like this little idea as we wrap up. Well, there's a couple things I want to end with before we wrap up. So Jesus has this kind of authority. And we see this sign of his authority, this picture of his authority. Does he have authority in your life? And have you submitted to his authority in your life? Is there an area in your life where you are resisting the authority of God, and could you consider what a difference it might make in your life if you surrendered that and if you submitted to his authority in your life in that area? And then the other thing I kind of want to leave you with is this other idea that was in your quarterly. The man that Jesus encountered had been disabled for 38 years. Subtract that number of years from your age. And if you're under 40, subtract 18. And even that's still going to get Clayton White. Right? Okay? So you may have to modify it even more. Subtract 38 from your age. How old are you? You don't have to tell me. Don't tell me. I don't want to do math. But what were your biggest hopes and dreams during that period of your life? 38 years ago, what were your biggest hopes and dreams during that period of your life?
Money.
What were your big... I don't want you to tell me. What were your biggest challenges at that point in your life? And then the last thing I want you to reflect on is this. What do you hope God does with the rest of your life? Didn't that 38 years ago give you a pretty good deal of perspective, though? Think about where you were 38 years ago. What you were going through. Your hopes, your dreams, your struggles. And the faithfulness of God between now and then. And what do you hope God does with the rest of your life? All right, guys. Let's wrap it up. Have a great morning. Have a great week. See you back here next week. Don't forget to get signed up for that Seder Passover event if you haven't already.